I'm Trista.
With more famous witches from history, buckle up for some bad witch energy. Like, share, and subscribe. Now let's go. Anne Boleyn, one of the most famous queens in history. But did you know that she was accused of witchcraft? Anne Boleyn was born in 1501. She was the daughter of an earl in Wiltshire, and she played outside, learned, did all of the normal little girl things. What set her apart from other women of her time was her thirst for knowledge. She made a name for herself when she moved to the French court and served as the Queen's maid of honor for nearly a decade. Upon her return to England, King Henry VIII became infatuated by her. As he pursued her, she looked at the bigger picture. She didn't want to be just a passing mistress. She wanted to be the queen. Unfortunately, at the time, he was already married to Queen Catherine of Aragon. Pope Clement VII refused to annul the marriage, so King Henry did the only thing that he could think to do. He created his own Christian denomination. Some women get flowers, some women get a whole new religion made for them. Unable to bear him a son, Anne bore a daughter, only furthered her difficulties. Ironically, Queen Elizabeth I became one of the most famous queens in history. Amongst the political advisors, Anne was being attacked on all sides for a multitude of reasons. They were jealous of the hold that she had on the king. She continued to be unable to produce a male heir, as well as unsettled conflict with the church after they became Anglican rather than supporting Catholicism. Thomas Cromwell, along with some other insecure noblemen, started spreading rumors about Anne that she was a treacherous adulteress who planned to overthrow the crown. They also accused her of witchcraft. King Henry, having just lost his firstborn son early on in his infancy, believed these rumors to be true. Thomas and the other nobles planted seeds in the king's mind that the reason why his son had passed was because Anne was using witchcraft. King Henry then took Jane Seymour as his new lover, and in May of 1536, Anne's trials began. King Henry hadn't himself formally admitted to believing that Anne had performed witchcraft and was participating in the dark arts. And despite Anne being a deeply religious woman, she was tried for witchcraft and eventually she was executed. She was beheaded in May of 1536, and legend says that after her head was severed from her body, that she continued to utter prayers for several moments after her head was removed from her body. Creepy, hey?
History has shown that people don't actually usually take kindly to practitioners of magic. From the 1300s to 1450, the demonization of witches came from a simmer to a roiling boil. Through the generations, witch trials increased, and so did the belief that witches were associated with the devil. In 1320, Pope John XXII authorized the Inquisition to pursue sorcerers and witches. That being said, the 14th century was already a tough time to be alive, and it became even harder now being accused of witchcraft anytime something goes wrong. Pope John XXII began a feud with the King of France, which ended up resulting in the Pope being abducted and later on led to his death. And even further, the beginning of the 100-Year War in 1354 and the bubonic plague had reached Sicily and Constantinople, and the people living in this time truly thought that the world was coming to an end, given that the death rate was 30 to 50% of Europe's population at this time. Though the plague did end up slowing down these accusations of people being witches, as people were too busy usually dying or trying not to die or grieving other people's deaths. In 1384, Sibilla Zanni, Pirina de Bugatis were captured by the Inquisition in Milan, Italy. They were questioned and tortured, and eventually they confessed to playing the game. The game was led by Madonna Oriente, who was otherwise known as the Lady of the East, and a supposed fairy who led the girls on a nocturnal flight throughout the neighbors' homes. Initially, the girls were believed to be delusional and rearrested in 1390. They ended up confessing to having laid with a dark spirit called Luciferum, as well as renouncing God, and for that they were burned at the stake. The University of Paris theology faculty condemned maleficium and sorcery as heresy, which was backed by the royal authority of France. The considerable weight of this, as well as word of mouth, passed this throughout Europe, among the lower classes as well as traveling preachers, solidifying the dark image of witches.
Margaret, who went as Molly Leigh, was born in a cottage outside of Brussels in 1685. Molly was a successful property owner, as well as she sold milk from her cows. to the nearby town. Unfortunately, during the late 17th century, witch hunts led people to believe that ugly or elderly solitary women were witches. When selling her goods in town, Molly often had her black jackdaw perched upon her shoulder. It's a type of corvid and often considered to be a familiar for witches. Paired with her erratic behavior, the townspeople grew suspicious of her. When the local parson's Reverend Thomas Spencer saw the bird perched outside of the local tavern that he frequented, called the Turk's Head, he accused her of souring the beer, because that makes sense. Molly was tried and she was executed for witchcraft in 1748. After her burial on April 1st that year, stories began to roll in of a ghost haunting the town. People believed that Molly's angry spirit had returned and was haunting them. Church officials exhumed her body from her grave, and they rotated her so that she was at a 90-degree compared to the rest of the graves in the churchyard, and facing a north to south. They threw her beloved bird in with her, just for good measure, before reburying her in the churchyard. Molly was smart. She wrote herself a will before she passed. It was witnessed by her friend Alice Beach and executed by Joseph Lovett. Until her death, her mother, Sarah Booth, was meant to collect the rents. Then, Joseph was to divide the properties to be sold. A hospital was supposed to be built on the properties, but unfortunately it never happened. Alice was to be given 20 shillings annually, as well as the property that she owned in Wallflat and Newbold Astbury. Any remaining estate that she had was to be liquidated and divided amongst the impoverished people of Bursell. When her connection to Mr. Lovett was brought into light, any of the accusations of witchcraft she had held against her became abolished. Historians believed that Thomas Spencer's enmity towards Molly was stemmed from her refusal to donate any of her funds to upkeep of the church, as she suspected that all of the funds and donations that the church received were being spent at the local tavern.
Next up we have Anna Goldie. She was born in October of 1737 in Senwald, Switzerland. Anna was said to have bore a child due to unknown circumstances, and when it did not survive, the town brought her to the stockade as a punishment and a form of public humiliation. She was sentenced to 6 years of house arrest for infanticide. Anna managed to escape and found refuge with the Schutte family in 1780. She worked in their home as a maid to Johann Jacob Schutte, a father to 5, a respected physician, judge, as well as naturalist in the town of Glarus. One day, 2 of Johann's daughters, Anna Maria and Susanna, ended up complaining to their mother that they found pins in their milk and bread. Anna, being responsible for these preparations, was expelled from their home. Soon after Anne's departure, one of the daughters ended up falling violently ill. Foul play and supernatural became the popular suspicion, and fingers began pointing towards Anna. They had arrested and returned Anna to Glarus, expecting that the one who caused the curse would be able to undo the curse. Upon her arrival, the girl actually did end up becoming better and thus ended up sealing her fate. After many days of imprisonment as well as torture, Anne confessed to having made a pact with the devil out of revenge for the treatment of the mother and the 2 daughters towards her. Anne's trial was short and she was sentenced to death for witchcraft and conspiring with the devil. She was beheaded in June of 1782. Wee little fun fact, in 2008 the canton of Glarus, Switzerland, ended up exonerating her as the last known person in Europe to be falsely accused and executed for witchcraft.
Born in the village of Norcott, Staffordshire, England, in February of 1917, Sybil Leek would go on to be known as England's most famous modern witch. Claiming herself to be a witch, descended from the infamous Molly Leigh. After the death of her husband, Sybil moved to Hampshire with an acquaintance. She spent some time living with the Nevy Wesh of the New Forest before opening 2 antique shops, one in Somerset and one in Ringwood, before she settled in opening a 3rd one in Burley. Her erratic behavior as a self-proclaimed witch drew in tourism and media attention. Although it gave an economic boost to Burley, townsfolk were displeased at the fact that they thought that Sybil was a fraud and the traffic that it brought through. After her landlord refused to renew her lease, she took it as a sign that it was time for her to move along. She closed up shop and immigrated to America. Pursuing her love of astrology, she wrote a book called A Shop in High Street and was invited to speak on it when the American Publishing House. Gaining more attention, she was flown to New York to interview on a television show called To Tell You the Truth. More television and radio interviews followed, and when she was in New York, she met a man named Hans Holzer. He was a parapsychologist, and he invited her to travel America investigating hauntings and He was a parapsychologist, and he invited her to travel America investigating hauntings and psychic phenomenon. Between 1962 and 1977, Sybil wrote roughly 20 novels, all about esotericism and occultism. She retired in Melbourne, Australia in 1982, where she died of cancer in the Holmes Regional Medical Center.
We hope you guys enjoyed learning about these ladies as much as we did.
If you want to see more of us, like, share, and subscribe. Toodaloo.
Toodaloo.